When I turn it back on.
All right, let's get started here if we could, folks. I just had somebody ask if you'll need your Chromebooks at any other point during the class. The answer is yes, but not until the very end. So if I know by 7th period sometimes you need to charge. If that's the case, find an outlet and let it sit there for a few minutes. You won't need it until the very end. But, I want to get started here. Actually, get into the meat of our first unit here. That's not a mistaken choice of words. We are going to talk about meat today. I know, right? You've been waiting, right? But we are starting this unit, this study of this time period known as the Progressive Era. And I think I had said yesterday that this is one of my favorite time periods to study. There's a lot of really, really low points, disgusting things that we're going to look at within this unit. And that's not why I enjoy it. But I enjoy it because it's a time where things are bad, and Americans, instead of complaining about it, stand up and try to do something about it. And I don't mean just stand up and shout, "This sucks." Okay? We're talking about serious efforts to make things better. One of my favorite examples, right around the turn of the century, the early 1900s, if Americans, if individuals were seen or even diagnosed to have some sort of maybe a mental disability, an emotional disability, oftentimes they were classified as insane, and they were placed into an asylum. And those asylums became basically just a building where you would stick these people. They were not well taken care of. All right, they were the exact opposite of that. And there was an individual. She had many different jobs, but one of them was that she was a newspaper reporter, and her name was Nellie Bly. And she had started hearing stories about the way in which people were being treated in these asylums, and she wanted to find out the truth because she believed that if half of those stories were true, something needed to be done. Now, she didn't just go up to the door of the asylum and knock, and when somebody answered, she didn't just be like, "So, I hear your asylum's terrible. What do you have to say about that?" Because she knew that they would probably feed her some sort of lie, tell her everything was great. So Nellie Bly got herself committed as an insane person to an asylum and spent a significant period of time in there as a patient so that she could observe what it was really like. And then she was pulled out, and she went about writing newspaper articles and bringing those realities to light. And she, through her efforts, was able to bring a lot of reform to that movement. All right, we're not talking about people going on Facebook and saying, "This sucks." No, we're talking about Americans, really digging in and pursuing real, true efforts to try to make things better. That's what makes me love this time period so much, right? And so we're going to look today as sort of an introduction to this unit. We're going to look at a situation sort of like this Nellie Bly situation, a very specific situation involving meatpacking factories. Okay? Around the turn of the century, Chicago, which is obviously a huge city today, was a big city back then as well. And that was largely because of two reasons. One, it had access to Lake Michigan. I think a lot of people forget that the Great Lakes are really deep. So there's a lot of shipping that goes on around the Great Lakes, and Chicago could tap into that. Beyond that, a lot of the railroads that came from the east would all kind of converge in Chicago before they would head out west. And so it became a center for the meatpacking industry. You would have trains that would get loaded with pigs, would get loaded with cattle, and they would be brought to Chicago. where factories would process that meat, make it into hamburger, make it into sausage, load it back up, and send it back out to consumers like you and me. Well, up in Chicago, there was another individual, kind of like a Nellie Bly. His name was Upton Sinclair. And he had started to hear some stories coming out of these meatpacking factories. Stories about how these workers were being treated. Stories about the way in which the meat was being processed. And it was kind of like with Nellie Bly. If even half of the stories were true, after he vomited, he wanted to bring some light to the issue and try to get some change. And so very much like Nellie Bly, Upton Sinclair got himself hired into one of these Chicago meatpacking factories, and he spent something like 7 weeks in that factory, and he was working, but he was also observing what it was like to be a worker, observing the way in which they were processing that meat. And once he was able to see it all firsthand, he comes back out of it and he writes his observations in a book called The Jungle. And so what we're going to do today, as sort of an intro, is we're going to take just a few minutes here. We're going to watch, I've got like a 3-4 minute clip that's going to give you a little bit more background. More than that, it's going to give you some pictures from those factories and also some early film footage of meatpacking factories at work. And then after that, we're actually going to read. We're not going to read The Jungle, the whole book. But I had chosen a few chunks from that book. And yes, I chose the particularly nasty excerpts. Right? And we're actually going to read those. And the thing that I want you guys to keep in mind while you read that is what Sinclair does is he writes this story and he makes up this character. This guy, he's an immigrant from Poland, or from Lithuania, I'm sorry. His name is Jurgis, and it's all about Jurgis seeing all of these things in the factory. Jurgis is just Upton Sinclair. And so everything that you read today and everything else that's in The Jungle is all the real deal. It's all Upton Sinclair's observations. I'm going to warn you, it is overly graphic in its description. All right, I've already had 2 class periods spend some time with it, and I can always tell when they get to certain parts because I've heard very loudly people go, "Oh my God, ooh, it's great. It's a lot of fun." And if it sickens you, then bingo, that's what I was going. Okay, trash cans at the front and back of the room. Just a heads up there. Right? So, before we get to that, turn your attention up here to the front, and let's take a look at this short clip to give you just a little bit more background.
The Industrial Revolution of the 1800s had a dramatic effect on economic and social life around the globe. The economies of industrializing nations shifted from agriculture to manufacturing, from rural to urban. Thanks to innovations in technology, energy production, and manufacturing, factories churned out large quantities of new products at lower prices. Almost overnight, cities swelled to support new industries. Soon, people were flocking to the growing cities, looking for work and a better life. But factory life did not live up to its promise. The workers had few rights. Wages were low, hours were long, working conditions were often unsafe, and unemployment, or worse, was always just an accident away. These harsh working conditions were common at the turn of the 20th century. In 1906, Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, a novel about the American meatpacking industry.
At the time that The Jungle was written, the plants were horrible places to work. They were full of violence, they weren't clean, and frequently diseased and dead animals were slaughtered and made into food.
Sinclair's novel follows the story of a young Lithuanian Jurgis Rutkus, who arrives in America seeking freedom and opportunity. He finds work in a prosperous and, as he learns to his dismay, filthy Chicago meatpacking plant.
Think about an individual coming from a rural agricultural kind of society, whether you think about Jurgis coming from Lithuania or a black migrant coming from the deep south of Mississippi, coming into a large industrial city, working in a mass production industry like meatpacking. Sinclair was writing on the crust of a giant wave of social and economic change that took place in the course of the late 19th century.
Before writing The Jungle, Sinclair spent 7 weeks around Chicago's meatpacking plants. He studied details about the work itself, the home lives of workers, and the structure of the business.
Upton Sinclair went into the plants and he saw dead animals being slaughtered. He saw filth all over the plant. He saw products going into sausage that shouldn't have been there. But more importantly, he came out of the plant radicalized by what happened to the workers, how they got chewed up the same way the food did.
Sinclair used the horrors he witnessed as the basis for Jurgis's fictionalized story. As Jurgis discovers, work in the plant involves backbreaking labor in unsafe conditions. When a worker becomes ill or gets injured, he's cast aside, and hundreds of jobless men fight to replace him. Workers in the pickling room have their fingers eaten by acid. Cooks live in danger of falling into open vats of boiling meat.
It was live or die, sink or swim. So the deadened conditions in the slaughtering house and that death that also permeated the battle between the owners and the workers.
It created this traditional, naturalistic, deterministic story in which human beings, just like the animals that are pulled up to shoot in the packing plants, and they were pulled up with this sense of optimism, beginning this idea of going to America, becoming successful, leaving behind the problems of Europe, and then they go down just like the animals, and they are processed too.
When The Jungle was published, there was a public outcry. Americans were outraged, and they urged the United States Congress to pass the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. More federal laws followed that prevented packers from adding fillers and impurities to meat. And United States Department of Agriculture inspectors were put in every meat plant in the country.
All right. So a couple things just to make sure that we've got everything we need from the video. You know, it talked about Sinclair actually going in, seeing firsthand what was going on within those factories. You know, not just the issues with how the meat was being processed, but also the ways in which workers were being treated. You know, how dangerous that work would have been, whether it's falling into boiling water or it's the fact that you're working with sharp knives, other cutting instruments. That obviously could hurt you, and you know, trying to bring light to those realities so that Americans could read about it and say, you know, what have I been eating? You know, we can't have this, and so you know, this idea that if he can get that information out there, that people will rightfully, I think, lose their minds. Right? So what we're going to do, you know, just to spend some time with his writing. Is we've got an assignment here. It's got 2 parts to it. Okay, part 1, and I've got some of this laid out up there on the screen. Part 1 is the reading analysis. I would like for you to read a little bit from The Jungle. All right, these are all going to be chunks that are taken straight from the book, and these are all the real deal observations that Upton Sinclair is going to make. Okay, the front side is the one that actually says excerpt or chunk. And, you know, the way that this strategy works is real simple. You take each chunk at a time. Okay, so you're not reading it all together, just each chunk at a time. And then what I'm asking you to do over on the right is, in your own words, give me a quick summary of what Sinclair is saying here. Try to think of it like, Hannah sits down with Garrett and says, hey, I read this paragraph from The Jungle. Here's what it was about. All right, you're not going to just quote word for word from the book. You're going to give a sentence or two, just a quick gist of what that paragraph was all about. That's what I'm asking you to do here. Now, it's graphic at times. Okay, Sinclair is going to describe some pretty heinous stuff. So just a heads up on that. Now, this is the bad, right? I mean, we got to see the bad to make sure we can see the good. So part one is going to be just kind of a focus on what it was really like. Part two, however, this is the second part of the grade, is that I'd like for you to be able to see the impact of this guy's book. The video clip said that when people read The Jungle, they lost their minds. They went to the government and said, you've got to pass laws that make sure that this meat is getting inspected. Well, let's get to that time period. Let's get to 1906 and really get a sense for what the impact, what the reaction really was. And so at this point, this is where you'll need your Chromebook. Okay, the second part of this assignment is on the web page, and it pretty clearly says Jungle Impact Analysis, and it's going to bring up this document. You'll make a copy of it. You'll answer those 3 questions, and then you'll share it back with me. Now, I've given you some resources to answer the questions. I'd like for you to actually spend some time with the newspapers at that time from 1906, and the Library of Congress has given us several of those newspapers. For example, if you click on this first one here, this first link, it's going to bring up a 1906 edition of a newspaper called The Commoner. This is going to be a Nebraska newspaper, a Lincoln, Nebraska newspaper. And, what I like about what Congress has done here, Samuel, just since you're up there, I'll pick on you. How easy is that to read in its current form? It's pretty tough because the words are small. So you're able to take your mouse and zoom in. And what I like about this is I don't care how close you zoom, the words don't lose their clarity. Sometimes when you zoom in real close with stuff, it gets real fuzzy. Not with this. So you can, move yourself around to these newspaper articles, different parts, and you can zoom real close, and you should be able to read it pretty clearly. I love the first link that I gave you because it really picks up on just how nasty some of these things are that are coming from the jungle. And this particular article gave a few recipes that are coming out of Chicago meatpacking factories. For example, this is the Chicago recipe for ham. A putrid ham, which means it's stale, it's old, it's ruined. We'll throw it on a table. We got a guy working in the factory. He moves a foot pump. That foot pump's going to operate a giant hypodermic needle. And that needle's going to inject a chemical into that ham that's going to kill the odor. So, it'll smell fine, and we'll sell it again. It's all good. All right. Another one here over to the side, because I know you want to read more of these. All right. Down here, here's the recipe for sausage. One of the steady sources of supply for sausage comes from meat, which has been shipped to what they call branch houses. So it's like, the trash. And if they can't sell that trash sausage, we'll wait till it's moldy. We'll wait till it's slimy. That word in particular, slimy. All right. And then we'll send it back to the packing house, and they'll convert it into sausage. It's all good. Waste not, want not. I feel like it's fruitcake here. We'll just throw it all together, and we'll make sausage, and there you go. So these newspaper articles, you don't have to use them all. I've given you probably more than you need, but the idea is that you'll use those to help you answer those 3 questions. And then when you're done, just share that with me. And that'll be the other part of the assignment here. Now, you've got the remainder of the time in here. You've got almost 20 minutes. All right, I think you could get one or the other done for sure. I don't care which one you do first. If you want to do the physical one first, the one that you've got in your hand, that's fine. You can work with a partner on that if you want. All right, that's fine with me. If you want to do the online assignment first, you can. Whatever. These are due, though, both of them, for a chance at full credit by the beginning of class tomorrow. So you may have to do just a little bit on your own, either tomorrow, either tonight, or maybe tomorrow here before class. Okay? You need to be in before or at the beginning of class tomorrow. I'll come around and answer whatever questions you got. All right? And make sure you're using your time, folks. Okay, you got almost 20 minutes. Let's put that to use and try to get as much done as we can. There you go. Oh, I got an extra one somewhere. There are extras sitting around anywhere? Thanks, sir.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, grab it. So yeah, you're gonna make a copy of it. Because I don't grab it. So the red bar is where it will actually say what it's saying. Sure. And you'll share the online document and you'll turn this into the basket when you're done. Do varsity assignment.
He does 6 sides.